Today's guest is Chris Toms. Chris has been a musician for more than 30 years and creates soundscapes and sound journeys to facilitate deep inner peace, healing, and connectedness. Chris, welcome to the show today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So we know that every single thing in the universe is a form of energy and vibration, and all vibrating at specific frequencies. But in case some audience members don't know, what is sound healing, and can you explain it in a bit more detail?
The sound healing / sound therapy, all kind of very, very similar. It's basically working with sounds, frequencies, and vibration to do exactly what we said, like facilitate peace and predominantly initiate what's called the relaxation response, which, as the name sounds, is you're relaxing as such. And when you let yourself relax is when basically your body generally does the things that it needs to do. But ultimately, there's sort of a few different components. The main component of let's just call it sound healing as such is, we work with brainwave entrainment. So there's in nature, when there's a strong frequency, a pure frequency, and it locks into another frequency, it basically pulls that frequency, into its sort of almost like into tune as such. It's almost like tuning it up. It's really kind of hard to explain, but the stronger, purer frequency will kind of, if it can connect with the other frequency, it sort of purifies it in kind of simple terms, I guess. If you've ever seen, there's a great experiment where they use two clocks. I don't know if you've ever seen it. And what they basically do is set two clocks to two different times, and they put them next to each other. And what happens is they end up syncing up perfectly. So what happens is that over time, the stronger one kind of pulls the other one in, and they end up locking into synchrony. So same thing happens with multiple females in a house. From a nature point of view, if you've got multiple females in a house, their cycles align, and so it's a natural thing that happens in nature. And basically that's what we're trying to do with sound and frequencies. And what we're trying to do is basically entrain the brain and drop the frequency response in the brain down to generally theta brainwaves, or also alpha brainwaves. Alpha is kind of like a deep meditative state, and theta is almost like a light sleep. So it's almost like dreamlike state. So you're kind of in a sound journey as such. You tend to flick between the two, between a deep meditative state and a very light sleep as such. In a nutshell, that's kind of how it works. But I kind of look at it that what we do is we create, sounds and frequencies and vibrations, in particular in a sound journey. It's kind of different in one-to-one work versus in group work. So in group work, it'll be a combination of sounds and frequencies that allow the people in the group to just go into that really super deep, relaxed state. And once you're in that state, then the body really does its own thing. The body does, as you can imagine, with any kind of modality, the body does the healing. We're just guides. We guide people into a place where their body does the things that need to be done. So ideally, the person is setting an intention, or they have something in mind of what they want to achieve. And then again, once they go into that next state down where they kind of step out of the way and let the body do its thing, is where the magic happens. In a one-to-one situation, it is a little different. In a one-to-one situation, I feel like my own personal journey with sound is that I find that when I'm in a room with someone, after doing some initial sort of wouldn't call it diagnosing, because obviously it's not a diagnosis, but we're looking for where the energy is out of balance, and where we feel that energy out of balance, then we work with particular instruments to try and facilitate the balance back into those areas. And sometimes that is from a by the book kind of point of view where you know there's specific frequencies that work with specific chakras, specific instruments, again, with specific areas of the body. And then there's sometimes, you know, more often than not, it's an intuition thing. You just feel that you need to do a little bit more of this instrument or less of this instrument, and you know, introduce this instrument, even though it's not actually specifically, you know, for that purpose. There's something that tells you to use that, and yeah, call it intuition or whatever it might be. It's a feeling, it's an energetic feeling of knowing that the person needs a particular sound and frequency, I guess. But yeah, in a nutshell, that's it's a little bit hard to explain, but yeah, it's really, yeah, brainwave entrainment, frequency following response, and ultimately all of it, to a certain extent, ties into, again, just putting that person in such a beautiful, super relaxed, calm state that their body goes about doing the repairs and the releasing and the healing as such, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And sound and vibration therapies are an ancient form of healing, aren't they?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
if you look, you know, obviously in its rawest form, you look back to obviously shaman and, you know, tribesmen and medicine men from, you know, tribes from thousands of years ago, and whether they're using frame drums or sticks, you know, banging together, singing, dancing. I mean, singing, obviously the voice is one of the most powerful instruments, you know, there's a whole different, you know, plethora of benefits and treatments that can be with the voice, and voice liberation, both for the person giving and the person receiving. You know, there's so much more, you know, wrapped up into that area. But yeah, obviously in its purest form, it goes back, yeah, thousands of years to, again, medical tribesmen and so forth. I think where it sort of took a turn and sort of come into the, you know, the modern era, we're still talking, you know, thousands of years ago, was with the ancient Greeks and the Egyptians and Mayans, where they actually had purpose-built chambers, which were acoustic chambers basically, and they would bring, you know, wounded soldiers and tribes people into these rooms and play different instruments, and again sing and you know, and obviously there's so much more when it comes to like the ancient Egyptians and their sound in their pyramids, and, you know, some of their temples of how these things were designed and what they're actually doing with frequencies in there. I mean, obviously there's conjecture that they actually built the pyramids with frequencies, you know, like lifting blocks with sound frequency and all this sort of stuff, which is a whole other kettle of fish. But yeah, the actual art of sound healing and healing with sound and vibration, yes, it does date back thousands of years, yeah, to the earliest sort of traces of man, I think, and probably beyond, for all we know.
Yeah, of course. And so in the introduction, I mentioned that you were a musician. So how did you step from being a musician into this? Like, how did that journey happen?
Well, it's funny because both have their similarities of why I love both. So what I loved about being a musician was definitely not the late nights in the pubs. And, you know, back in the days, everybody used to smoke in the pub, and, you know, you'd be playing and the place would be full of smoke and beer and, you know, spirits all over the floor, and, you know, just not the nicest place to be. But what I did love about being a musician was that ability to drag people out of their world for a period of time, like where for an hour of their life, you know, they weren't thinking of work or kids or bills or whatever this, they were there, they were in the moment, they were completely, you know, and there's that energetic bounce, you know, from you know, performer to the you know, the receiver and or the giver to the receiver. And that's the bit I loved. I love that energetic play between, you know, yourself and the crowd. And yeah, I loved that ability just to pull people out of their world for a while. And, you know, they dropped back into it afterwards and went back to their normal life and, you know, probably woke up the next day with a screaming hangover. But for a period of their time, I had them, you know, they were, well, not necessarily me, the band, we had them, you know, and we were able to give them some joy and some peace. And this is just a big extension of that, really. And so I guess in reality, I stopped playing in bands. I got sick of, again, all night gigs at, smoky dens and, packing up on dodgy street corners while you're trying to put your equipment in your car and, looking over your shoulder every 5 minutes. Like, this is not cool. And so I gave it all up, and I guess my wife saw that I was, quite frustrated, like the old frustrated musician and frustrated, person, I guess. And then we went to Bali, and basically, it wasn't